You have likely noticed by now that your life, despite its outward shifts in scenery and its changing cast of characters, feels strangely repetitive, as if you are moving through a series of rooms that all eventually lead back to the same cold, familiar hallway. There is a weight in the air, a sense of melancholy that stems not from a single tragedy, but from the quiet realization that you are trapped in a loop of your own making, a psychological architecture designed by a version of yourself you have never truly met. This is the silent error that Carl Jung warned us of, the profound and often devastating reality that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. We move through the world believing we are the masters of our intentions, the captains of our emotional ships, and yet we find ourselves crashing against the same jagged rocks time and time again, wondering why the ocean is so cruel when, in reality, it is our own hand on the tiller, guided by a ghost that lives in the cellar of our psyche. This ghost is not a malevolent spirit, but a fragment of your own soul that you have exiled, a part of the shadow that has taken root in the archetype of the lover, demanding to be seen, felt, and integrated, even if it has to burn your world down to get your attention. The archetype of the lover is perhaps the most misunderstood and most dangerous of all the internal forces we carry, for it is the primary driver of our desire for connection, for beauty, for intimacy, and for the ecstatic union with something beyond the boundaries of our own skin. In its luminous form, the lover allows us to perceive the divine in another person, to feel the pulse of the universe in a single touch, and to move through life with a sense of grace and sensitivity that makes existence bearable. However, when the lover falls into the shadow, it becomes a bottomless pit of need, a hunger that can never be satiated because it is seeking an external solution to an internal fracture. You find yourself drawn to the same types of people, those who cannot love you, those who mirror your own abandonment, or those who demand you sacrifice your identity for their approval, and you tell yourself it is bad luck, or that you have a type, when in truth your shadow is orchestrating these encounters to force a confrontation with the parts of yourself you have deemed unlovable. The ego, in its desperate attempt to maintain a facade of competence and goodness, represses the darker urges of the lover, the possessiveness, the jealousy, the paralyzing fear of being alone, and in doing so, it grants these traits a life of their own, allowing them to seep into your relationships like a slow poison that you mistake for passion. To understand why this pattern persists, one must look at the internal conflict between the ego and the shadow, a war fought in the silent spaces between your thoughts and the visceral reactions of your body. Your ego identifies with the persona of the loving person, the one who cares too much, the one who is always there for others. Yet this identification is often a shield against the terrifying truth of your own inner void. Behind the mask of the lover, there is a shadow that is cold, transactional, and terrified of its own insignificance. When you refuse to acknowledge this shadow, it manifests in your life as a repetitive drama. The partner who betrays you, the friend who overlooks you, or the career that leaves you feeling hollowed out. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a participant in a divine comedy of the soul, where the shadow plays the villain only to force the ego into a state of higher awareness. The melancholy you feel is the soul's mourning for its lost wholeness, a grief that arises because you are living only half a life, clinging to the light while the darkness grows dense and heavy in the corners of your mind. You seek the other to complete you, not realizing that the other you are searching for is the very part of yourself you have buried in the earth. The silent error is the belief that the lover must always be soft, when in reality, the mature lover requires the strength of the warrior and the wisdom of the magician to survive the harshness of existence. Without integration, the lover in your shadow becomes the addicted lover, a state where you are not in love with a person, but with the feeling of being desired, or even the feeling of being in pain. There is a perverse comfort in the repetitive patterns of suffering because they are known, and the ego prefers a known misery to an unknown freedom. This is the melancholy of the human condition, the realization that we are often the architects of our own cages, bars forged from the iron of our childhood wounds and the gold of our unfulfilled longings. We walk through the world like ghosts, haunting our own lives, waiting for someone to arrive and break the spell, failing to see that we are the ones who cast it. Jung understood that the psyche is a self-regulating system, much like the body, and these repetitive patterns are the psyche's way of trying to heal itself. It brings you back to the scene of the crime, to the same emotional wounds, not to punish you, but to give you another chance to respond with consciousness instead of compulsion. Consider the nature of your most intimate failures, the moments where you felt the most misunderstood or discarded, and observe the threads of similarity that bind them together. Perhaps you find yourself constantly playing the role of the savior, only to be resented by the very people you tried to rescue. Or perhaps you are the eternal wanderer, unable to commit because you fear that truly being seen would reveal the defect you are certain lives at your core. These are not personality traits. They are archetypal scripts played out by the shadow lover who has been denied a seat at the table of your conscious life. When we talk about the conflict between the ego and the shadow, we are talking about the distance between who you think you are and who you actually are in your totality. The ego wants to be a hero, a saint, or a success, while the shadow contains the rejected trash of your history, the anger you weren't allowed to express, the selfishness you were taught to hide, and the raw, unrefined power of your libido. Because the lover archetype is so closely tied to our sense of value and belonging, the shadow version of the lover often carries the most shameful parts of us, leading to a life where we are perpetually seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving it, because we ourselves cannot validate the darkness within. This reflective melancholy is not a sign of weakness, but a gateway to the primordial wisdom that has been forgotten in the noise of the modern world. The ancient seekers knew that the descent into the underworld, the journey into the shadow, was a necessary rite of passage for anyone seeking true individuation. In the silence of your own repetition, there is a voice calling out from the depths of your unconscious, asking you to stop running and finally face the mirror. The mirror does not show you the face you have prepared for the world. It shows you the eyes of the archetypal lover, who has been starved of genuine connection because you have been too busy chasing shadows on the wall. The repetitive patterns in your life will only cease when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of changing. When you finally realize that the silent error is not something you did, but something you are refusing to see. You are looking for love in the kingdom of the ego, where everything is measured and conditional, while the true power of the lover lies in the shadow, where the primal, unconditional forces of creation and destruction reside. As we go deeper into this labyrinth, we must confront the idea that the repetitive patterns are also a form of ancestral inheritance, a burden passed down through generations of lovers who did not know how to love themselves. You are carrying the unlived lives of your parents, the silenced desires of your grandmothers, and the repressed rages of your grandfathers. The archetypal lover within you is distorted by these echoes, making it feel as though you are a character in a play that was written long before you were born. The ego struggles against this, trying to assert its autonomy, but it is like a leaf trying to swim against the current of a vast subterranean river. To break the cycle, you must stop trying to fix your life on the surface and instead dive into the murky waters of your psychological history. You must ask why you are so comfortable in your sadness, why the feeling of being not enough is as familiar as an old coat, and why you are so terrified of a love that does not require you to disappear. This is the work of the soul, the slow, agonizing, and ultimately liberating process of reclaiming the fragments of yourself that you have scattered across the years. The melancholy intensifies as we realize that the silent error is also a form of self-betrayal. Every time you entered a relationship knowing it was wrong, every time you stayed in a situation that diminished your spirit, and every time you silenced your intuition to appease the ego's need for security, you were feeding the shadow. The lover archetype, when denied its healthy expression of passion and boundaries, turns inward and becomes a source of self-destruction. This is why the patterns feel so heavy. They are the accumulation of 1,000 no's to your own soul. You have created a life that is a monument to what you think you should want, while the true desires of your heart are locked in the basement, screaming to be let out. The conflict between the ego and the shadow is essentially a conflict between survival and vitality. The ego wants you to survive, to fit in, and to be safe. The shadow, through the archetype of the lover, wants you to live, to burn with purpose, and to experience the raw intensity of existence, even if it is dangerous. The repetition is the shadow's way of saying, If you will not live for yourself, I will make you suffer until you have no choice but to change. If you look closely at the moments when you have felt most alive, you will often find that they were moments of profound risk, where the ego's control was momentarily suspended and the lover was allowed to roam free. Yet, because these moments are so intense, the ego quickly moves to categorize them, to tame them, or to feel guilty about them, thus pushing the experience back into the shadow. This is the tragedy of the modern psyche. We are terrified of our own depth. We prefer the shallow repetitions of our daily miseries because they do not require us to face the staggering responsibility of our own potential. The silent error is the assumption that you are a finished product, a static entity, rather than a dynamic process of unfolding. You are not your patterns. You are the awareness that observes them. But as long as you identify solely with the ego, the patterns will continue to define you. The melancholic reflection we are engaged in now is the first step toward breaking the mirror. It is the moment you stop blaming the other and start asking, what part of me is calling this experience into being? The lover archetype is intrinsically linked to the concept of beauty, but beauty in the Jungian sense is not merely aesthetic. It is an encounter with the sublime, which often contains an element of terror. When we avoid the terror of true intimacy, the risk of being truly known and thus truly rejected, we settle for the pretty lies of our repetitive patterns. We choose partners who are beautiful on the outside but emotionally vacant, or we pursue careers that look successful to the world but are hollow to our touch. This is the shadow lover's influence. It makes us settle for the map instead of the territory. The silent error is the belief that we can have the light without the heat, the connection without the vulnerability. We want the rewards of the lover without the sacrifice of the ego, but the shadow knows that nothing of value is gained without a loss of who you thought you were. To break the cycle, you must be willing to let the old version of yourself die, the version that is addicted to its own suffering, the version that finds identity in its wounds, and the version that is too afraid to stand in the full sunlight of its own desire. Consider the silence that follows a great loss or a profound disappointment. In that silence, if you do not rush to fill it with new distractions or new justifications, you will hear the rustling of the shadow. It is here, in the quietude of melancholy, that the archetypal lover speaks most clearly. It tells you of the dreams you traded for safety, the passions you muffled for the sake of decorum, and the deep, visceral hunger for a life that feels authentic. The repetitive patterns are the knocking at the door of your consciousness. Each time the pattern repeats, the knock gets louder, the stakes get higher, and the pain becomes more acute. This is not the universe being cruel. It is your own soul being persistent. It refuses to let you sleep through your own life. The silent error is the failure to recognize that your symptoms are your teachers. Your anxiety, your depression, your failed romances, these are not problems to be solved by the ego. They are signals from the shadow that the current path is a dead end. As we move toward a deeper understanding, we must embrace the paradox that the very thing we fear most, the integration of the shadow, is the only thing that can save us from the repetition. The lover archetype, when integrated, gives us the capacity for agape or eros in their highest forms, a love that is both fierce and compassionate, a passion that is grounded in reality rather than fantasy. But to get there, we must pass through the mysterium conjunctionis, the alchemical marriage of the opposites within us. We must marry our inner light to our inner darkness. We must acknowledge that we are both the lover and the betrayer, the victim and the perpetrator, the seeker and the one who is lost. The repetitive patterns in your life are the result of an internal divorce, a separation between your conscious ideals and your unconscious drives. You are a house divided against itself, and as the ancient wisdom suggests, such a house cannot stand. The melancholy you feel is the atmosphere of this divided house, the cold draft that blows through the cracks in your foundation. The weight of this realization can be overwhelming, for it places the responsibility for your life squarely on your own shoulders. It is much easier to believe in fate, in bad luck, or in the flaws of others. To accept that the silent error lies within your own psychology is to accept that you have been both the prisoner and the jailer. But in this realization lies the only true path to freedom. If you are the one creating the loop, you are the only one who can break it. This does not happen through a sudden act of will, but through a long, patient process of observation and acceptance. You must become a student of your own shadows. You must watch your reactions, your projections, and your recurring thoughts with the curiosity of a scientist and the compassion of a saint. When you feel the familiar pull of a repetitive pattern, the urge to call that person you know is bad for you, the impulse to self-sabotage just as things are going well, you must pause. In that pause, you create a space for the shadow to speak without acting. You say to the archetypal lover within, "I see you, I hear your hunger, I acknowledge your fear, but we are not going to do this again." This process is what Jung called individuation, the journey toward becoming the person you were always meant to be, before the world told you who you should be. It is a journey that requires you to descend into the depths of your own melancholy and find the treasures hidden in the dark. The lover archetype, once redeemed from the shadow, becomes a source of immense creative energy. It allows you to connect with the world, not out of a sense of lack, but out of a sense of abundance. You no longer need the other to complete you because you have found the completion within yourself. The repetitive patterns dissolve because they no longer have a purpose. The lesson has been learned, the shadow has been heard, and the ego has been humbled. The silent error is corrected when the silence is no longer filled with the echoes of the past, but with the presence of the now. The journey does not end with a happily ever after, for the psyche is infinite and the work of integration is never truly finished. However, the nature of the melancholy changes. It is no longer a heavy, suffocating cloud, but a thin, translucent mist, a reminder of the depth and the mystery of the soul. You move through life with a new kind of sensitivity, a melancholy of the wise that recognizes the beauty in the transitory and the sacred in the mundane. You are no longer a slave to the archetypal forces, you are their partner. The lover within you is finally free to love without the shadow of possession, and the ego is finally free to serve without the shadow of inflation. The loops are broken, the hallway leads to a garden, and for the first time you are not just surviving your destiny, you are creating it. This is the ultimate promise of Jungian psychology, that by facing the darkness we find a light that can never be extinguished, and by correcting the silent error, we find the courage to live a life that is truly our own. Reflect on the silence of your own life. Listen to the patterns that speak in the quiet hours of the night. Do not turn away from the melancholy, for it is the compass pointing toward your own wholeness. The archetypal lover is not a ghost to be feared, but a part of your own heart that has been waiting for you to come home. The conflict between the ego and the shadow is the fire in which the soul is forged, and the repetitive patterns are the hammer and anvil. Every time you face a repetitive struggle, you are being given a chance to wake up. You are being asked, who are you really? Are you the pattern, or are you the one who can break it? The answer lies in the courage to look into the abyss of your own psychology and see, not a monster, but a reflection of your own unexpressed divinity. The silent error is only silent as long as you refuse to listen. Once you hear it, it becomes a song of lament. Yes, but also a song of liberation. As the echoes of your past failures begin to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of a conscious life, you will find that the people and situations you once drew into your orbit out of compulsion no longer hold any power over you. The type you were once attracted to, the emotionally unavailable, the volatile, the mirroring, will no longer resonate with your frequency because the internal wound they were meant to reflect has begun to close. The lover archetype, no longer acting out from the shadow, finds its fulfillment in genuine intimacy and self-respect. You begin to see that the repetitive patterns were never a curse, but a profound act of grace from your own unconscious, a desperate attempt to keep you from wasting your life in the service of an illusion. The melancholy remains, but it is now seasoned with the salt of wisdom, a quiet recognition that while the path was difficult, it was the only path that could have brought you to this place of clarity. The silent error, once exposed to the light of consciousness, loses its ability to direct your fate. You are no longer the victim of a repetitive life, but the author of a narrative that is both complex and beautiful. The archetypal struggle between the ego and the shadow becomes a dance, a movement toward a center that is neither light nor dark, but both. This is the state of the whole man, the individuated self, who can stand in the presence of the lover without losing himself, and who can face the shadow without being consumed. The journey through the psyche is the most difficult journey a human can undertake, for it requires the death of the familiar and the birth of the unknown. But on the other side of the repetition, on the other side of the melancholy, lies the truth of who you are, and that truth, as painful as it may be to uncover, is the only thing that can truly set you free. The silence is no longer empty. It is full of the presence of your own soul. The archetype of the lover has been reclaimed. The ego has found its proper place, and the shadow has been integrated into the tapestry of your being. You move forward not as a person trying to avoid the past, but as a person who has integrated the past into a vibrant, living present. The loops have straightened into a path, and though the path may still lead through valleys of shadow and peaks of light, you walk it with eyes wide open. You have corrected the error. You have faced the ghost. You have become the master of your own internal architecture, and in doing so, you have finally begun to truly live. The story of your life is no longer a repetition of old tragedies. It is a new creation, emerging moment by moment from the depths of a conscious heart. Consider then the profound depth of this transformation. It is not merely a change in behavior, but a fundamental shift in the very ground of your existence. When the silent error is corrected, the way you perceive the world undergoes a radical metamorphosis. The lover archetype, now functioning in its healthy state, allows you to see the world with a sense of radical relatedness. You are no longer an isolated ego fighting for survival in a hostile universe. You are a part of a vast, interconnected web of meaning. The repetitive patterns were your psyche's way of trying to break down the walls of your isolation, forcing you to recognize that you cannot find completion through the acquisition of things or the manipulation of people. True completion comes from the union of the internal opposites. The melancholy you once felt as a burden is revealed to be the gravity of the soul, the force that pulls you toward your own center. This central point, the self, is the ultimate destination of the Jungian journey. It is the place where the conflict between the ego and the shadow is finally resolved, not through the victory of one over the other, but through their synthesis. In the heart of the self, the archetypal lover finds its eternal home. Here, passion is tempered by wisdom, and vulnerability is protected by strength. The silent error was simply the belief that you were only the part of you that lived in the light. Now you know that you are the light and the dark, the seeker and the sought, the lover and the beloved. The repetitive patterns in your life were the map you followed to find this center. Every failure, every heartbreak, and every moment of despair was a necessary step on the way to this realization. The melancholy has served its purpose. It has led you through the desert of your own unconscious and brought you to the oasis of your own soul. As you stand at this threshold, look back one last time at the loops and the labyrinths of your past. Do not look with regret but with gratitude. Those patterns were the only way your soul knew how to speak to you. They were the silent error that saved you from a life of superficiality. The archetypal lover in all its shadow forms was your most faithful companion, never leaving your side until you were ready to see the truth. Now, as the sun of consciousness rises over the landscape of your life, the shadows lengthen and then merge into the reality of the day. The silence is now yours to fill with whatever words you choose. The repetition is over. The life you have been waiting for is finally ready to begin, not as a reaction to the past, but as an expression of the infinite depth you have discovered within. You are the architect, the lover, and the witness. And for the first time, you are whole. This wholeness is not a state of perfection, but a state of completeness. It means you no longer reject the parts of yourself that are inconvenient or unloving. You accept the melancholy as part of the beauty, the shadow as part of the power, and the ego as the necessary vessel for your experience. The silent error was the division. The correction is the union. You have navigated the conflict between the ego and the shadow, guided by the archetype of the lover, and you have emerged into a landscape of profound meaning. The repetitive patterns were the nursery rhymes of your psychological childhood. You have now graduated to the epic poetry of a conscious existence. The weight is gone, the air is clear, and the path is open. The only thing left to do is to walk it, one conscious step at a time, into the mystery of the unfolding moment. There is a certain quiet majesty in a life lived with this level of awareness. It is a life that no longer needs to shout to be heard, or to struggle to be seen. Like the depth of the ocean, it has its own stillness, even when the surface is turbulent. The archetype of the lover, now integrated, provides a steady current of warmth and connection that flows from within, regardless of external circumstances. You have discovered that the love you were searching for in the repetitive patterns was actually the love you needed to give to yourself. The acceptance of your own complexity, the forgiveness of your own errors, and the celebration of your own existence. This is the gold of the shadow, the treasure that was buried under the weight of your repetitions. By correcting the silent error, you have performed the ultimate alchemical act. You have turned your suffering into wisdom, and your melancholy into peace. In the end, we find that Carl Jung was right. Psychology is not just a study of the mind, but a path to the soul. The repetitive patterns in our lives are the breadcrumbs leading us back to our true nature. The conflict between the ego and the shadow is the dialogue of our becoming. And the archetypal lover is the flame that guides us through the darkness. The silent error is not a failure of character, but a call to initiation. You have answered that call. You have descended into the depths, faced the shadow, and reclaimed the lover. The patterns have been broken. The loop is gone. You are free to love, to live, and to be, in the full, magnificent totality of your being. The journey of the soul is the only journey that matters, and you have finally found your way home.